Okay. Okay, so I have entitled this, well, originally it was thinking systemically, and then I realized I'd left out the important bit, which was the application of systems thinking approaches to practice, which is my particular interest. And the little subsection of that is how might diagramming help. So I'm hoping during the talk I will explain to you what I mean by that. And really it was interesting for me listening to Russell and Jan today, because I said, well, hopefully I'm picking up a little bit, because they were talking about, to me, what is systemic thinking about, how do you encourage it, these mind-opening questions, how do you get people to do this? But what I want to do first is give you a little flavour of where I'm coming from on this, if you like, why I'm interested in applying systems thinking. And then I'll say a little bit about the observations, go a little bit backwards. I'll tell you my conclusions first, and then I'll say a little bit about why I've come to those. And at two different points in this talk, hoping I get the timing right, I'm going to give you a little time to discuss amongst yourselves what I have said, or I give you a question to discuss. And all I'm hoping is that you'll be good, and when I say stop, you'll stop talking and let me continue talking. Dream on, I know, it's very dangerous to do that. But okay, so what I'm going to say, I'll say a little bit first about my interest, my journey. I have been doing I'm teaching for the Open University for quite some years. I trained in facilitation, done group facilitation, and also mediation. And some years ago I became very interested in social conflict. Not necessarily war, because to me that conflict is way out there somewhere, but really post-war situations, or situations like we have in the UK at the moment, Brexit. You have social conflicts that are problematic for some reason. So this was my interest, and also because I teach conflict with the Open University, what role has education in helping people to develop the capacities to work constructively with conflict? And one of the things, because at the same time I was also studying systems thinking and doing a master's in it, I began to ask, why don't I see more evidence of systems thinking approaches in organizations, entities that work in conflict situations? And I didn't really see a lot of evidence of it there. So that question kept bothering me. Why isn't it out there? Why isn't it to be seen? And so this is where I was coming from, where these conclusions come from. And you might not agree with them, that's fine. They're just my personal observations, conclusions from, I said, going, traveling, talking to people, studying. First of all, I said there is an issue with communication of systems thinking approaches. To me, there's a need to develop approaches that others can relate to, they can understand. They're what I call user-friendly. They don't totally baffle people when you go to work with them. They just say, okay, I can get that. That's makes sense to me. And the other thing I became to realize, because now I'm a bit biased in this, I'm a facilitator, so I'm a bit process nutter. Process, I'm always looking at how are things fixed up, how is this room arranged, where is everybody sitting in relation to everybody else. So, a bit of a nutter that way. But I did come to the conclusion that process is often very invisible. Because when things go well, people don't notice the process. It's when they go badly that people say that was a terrible meeting, that was a terrible event, because the process has not gone well. And as facilitators, we talk a lot about this. But I do believe process matters in applying systems thinking approaches. So how you get people working together, how you get them interacting, the kind of questions you ask them, the tasks you give them to do. So to me that was an important component to think about. And at the time I loved playing with pictures, and so clip art was my thing at this time. But it was just a little picture I put together, just again trying to encapsulate for myself how I saw the situation. And this is a few years old now, this one. But really I was seeing conflict, really messy, unpredictable, lots of unknowns in conflict situations. And seeing in the literature and reports from organisations working in the field this recognition that things weren't always done very well, there's a need to do things differently, but seemingly no idea of what that differently might look like. But certainly some interest in systems thinking, complexity science, and then I just put this thing of somebody going along to an expert in systems thinking, getting some wonderful talk from them and running away saying, oh God, let me out of here, I don't know what's going on here, I can't make sense of what this person's talking to me. That was my feeling at the time, that there's a lot of mystique around systems thinking that doesn't help people to understand how they can do it. And just to go forward with the other observations conclusions I came to, there is this tension with being systemic in approach. That when you go to work in any field, any organisation, they want something they can incorporate into their everyday way of doing things. Now the problem with, to me, to being systemic is it can't be every day. It can't be it has to be a continual questioning, challenging yourself, thinking about what you think. So the minute you try and make it routine, it becomes a problem. And I'll say a bit more about these last two in a moment. Critical reflection, I'll tell you a little bit more about what I mean by that. That I believe that's core to thinking systemically. So I'll say a bit more about that one. And this idea of diagramming. I think there's magic in diagramming, and I'll again say why I think that. Producing diagrams, the process, not so much the diagrams themselves, the process of producing a diagram. And then when you start to share it, or when you start to actually produce diagrams collaboratively, to me there's something quite interesting. I always say it makes your brain hurt, but that is part of what thinking systemically is. It's about making your brain hurt. It doesn't know what is going on half the time, but that's that's what it's about. So from these, just three things I want to just say a bit more about. What I understand the nature of thinking systemically to be, and I think that will hopefully reflect what others have said in the room today. What I understand critical reflection to be and how I think about that, and at that point I'm going to ask you to discuss a little bit about that, and then where I see diagramming coming into that. Right, so let's just do a little bit. Now I think a lot of this has probably been said already. I'll go fairly quickly through this. That this idea that thinking systemically is about seeing a situation. It's messy, it's complex, but it's got lots of interconnections, lots of interdependencies between the players, the system, the structures that are there. So they're all kind of connected up in some way. Another important component, and that came out in I think it was in Russell's talk today, I was seeing this idea that you have to walk a line between being non-reductionist, which in other words is seeing the whole picture, seeing the big picture, but also being reductionist, because you have to work with a bit of the system. You can't work with everything. Or let me say a bit of the situation rather than system. So you can't work with everything, you have to work with a part of it, but keeping that balance between being reductionist and non-reductionist is important. And part of that is it's a learning process, it's dynamic, it's changing, it's not, it's something you're going back and forth from all the time. So it's like a juggling act, you're balancing how you're working, whereabouts you're working in the system. And from that, it's this again, and this reiterates this thing of exploring boundaries. This is what we give our students in the Open Universities. What is systems thinking? It's about exploring boundaries. In other words, you define a system. It's either an educational system, a health system, social conflict system, we might call it. But you are defining something. You're constructing something. And to me, key in that is being aware that you've done that. Keeping that awareness to the forefront that I have decided this is the system, or this group of people have decided this is the system, or this society has decided this is the system. And then every so often critically examine, why have I decided, and if I give you an example from, if you're doing any kind of conflict work with anybody, who are you working with and why are you working with this group of people and not that group of people? Why have I left that group out? Why don't I talk to them? And why are these people in the room? So that questioning has to go on, because the system is dynamic, it's changing. So at some point it might be appropriate to talk to one group of stakeholders, but if things have changed, you may have to bring in some others. So, and you can't work with everybody. You have to make choices all the time as to who you work with. If you do any kind of community consultation work, you're also always just talking to a subsection of the community. You can't talk to everybody. So whose voices do you listen to and why? So these are the questions you need to be asking. I think these relate to Jan's open question. You're all the time having to open your mind. What is it you're looking at and what are you leaving out? And why are you doing that? And then that thing of seeking an understanding of relationships. Obviously the relationships are those that you have included in your system, but also constantly recognizing there's something wider out there, there's an environment, and don't forget about it, it matters. So if we talk about a health system and we forget, well, it's part of the whole social system. There's the political system, there's the politics, there's the education, all these are impacting and interacting. But again, because we're having to narrow what we can work with. In other words, we would never do anything because you work with the universe if you want to work with the whole system. So, if you don't narrow things down, you're just going to sit there in confusion. Right, I don't know what to do. Okay, so the next little bit I want to say a bit about is this idea of what critical reflection. Now, as an academic, I know it's always dangerous trying to define anything. The minute you put anything into a definition, somebody's going to disagree with you. And they're going to say, no, it doesn't mean that. So I always say to my students, define it how you understand it at the moment. What definition you are using. Don't try and make it an absolute, because you're doomed if you try and do that. So critical thinking. In academia we talk a lot about making students critical thinkers, getting them to critically assess this and that, without particularly defining what the heck we mean by that. I see critical thinking as something we ask doing of the literature, of all information that's out there, being able to assess it, evaluate it, and decide how you're going to use it to make decisions. Ultimately, you're using it to make a decision, to take a course of action. So critical thinking is about that kind of process of evaluating information, evaluating actions, whatever. Reflection and practice to me then is something quite a bit different. It's looking at what I'm doing, how I'm doing things, why I'm doing things in certain ways, and asking myself, okay, what did I do there? Why did I do it like that? Was it effective? So I'm reflecting on, I might reflect on this, how I've given this talk today. Did I think it worked? Did they all fall asleep? Okay, they're my kind of measures of whether the talk was effective or not. Then critical reflection comes to this idea of, again, seeing where you are in the system. The critical reflection to me is recognizing you are part of the system. Whether you are a consultant, whether you are if I'm a teacher, I'm part of it. I'm not outside it. I'm actually part of it. And I'm affected by it. And I bring my own biases, presumptions, values to bear, but also the system of which I am a part is influencing me in how I'm interacting with it. So this dynamic is going on as well. So this is critical reflection, is recognizing the values, the assumptions, the beliefs that are driving me and the system being lots of other people, obviously, involved. So this is critical reflection, is actually recognizing, being aware of that, and then seeing how that, at times you may want to challenge it. Right, I want to do this for that. And looking at the linkage between these three, and this does my brain in sometimes trying to work this out. I did a very complicated diagram once in it and said, no, I'll leave that, I have to come back to that. But to me, critical thinking, as used quite frequently, is often thought of as directed outwards. It's not about me, it's not about where I sit, it's about looking at the works of others. Certainly in academia, it tends to be looking outwards to the work of other people. Reflection and practice, it's something that isn't, to some people, is quite natural. I mean, I'm a fairly natural reflector. I spend a lot of time in my head thinking, reflecting on things. Other people are very much less so. If you've ever tried to work with a group of people and get them to reflect, you'll see this. Some are very uncomfortable with the idea of just sitting quietly, thinking about why I haven't done what I've done, why am I acting in this way. It does require some space and time given over to it. And that is problematic often in organisations, allowing time to just examine practice, to step back, to look, to reflect. But neither process, to my mind, challenges the status quo. In other words, the way things are set up, what is considered normal behaviour in an organisation, in an institution. Either process can just accept what is and go along with it. To me, critical reflection goes up another level and takes that meta look at the whole system and may start challenging it. May start saying, why are we thinking this way? Why are we operating this way? Why do we think this is a good thing to do? Right, where are we time-wise? Right, now, and this is where you come in. I'm giving you a statement here. Critical reflect. This is what we do to students all the time. So you're now students. We give them a statement, discuss. So you are now getting it. Critical reflection is an essential capacity for thinking systemically. Discuss. So I just want you to get together in groups of 3 or 4. You can say your tables if you like. You might like to get together in slightly smaller groups, maybe 4 people. And I want to give you 10 minutes to discuss that or anything else you've heard. Maybe there's something else you want to talk about. But just have 10 minutes. I don't need to know what you're discussing. You don't have to report back. So it's all right. You can say anything. And they're not necessarily looking for any questions back. At the end, we might have time for some questions. I'm just trusting you to get on and use your brains and have a little discussion amongst yourselves. Okay? Right. Get together. You can do the knees thing if you like. Check this out.
So now I've got all of the above. Very similar.
Which is even more essential. A lot of people they do the system even while doing it, they just convinced that they have to and that's not anything that to do.
Yeah, all the time. I can see all the programs.
And I used to work for an organisation. So see, this is a tool in our business. It's a good tool, but they were more action oriented. Just thinking generally. They'll run before they'll think, where am I running to? Why am I running? But I'll run. That made it really hard for people who were naturally something has to be done, and so particular direction of action oriented, so I have no problem again. Something to get results.
So I do that all the time. I'm very confident. I can demonstrate the future happening, the future reporting is against the seems to work for me. That's my mental model, and that's how I do it. So that whatever you call that, that gets me sort of where I am. So I'm working critical all the time. Always everything that I'm doing about it. I'm always and when I'm starting to expand organizations, I'm trying to bring the organizations together. I want to think about project we have done. So I do want to go where I can't really science. So now I'm working I'm really got more step back afterwards. I know, it's that lessons learned thing. That never ever happens off the same method. Things like I've been step back and do what it's on. And not only I've been running a project. Develop these ideas further. While I'm able to work with all and then if I'm going to where the rumors because otherwise I'm going to have a massive contest as to what kind of thing. And that's all that as a manager.
When you say this big sales,
so it's like, you know, manufacturing is very important to and all of that, of course, if we do that move forward, I'm not going to make instance that we get stuck as a competitive get back to that. That's the resurrection that I've been. I realise if I ever so just move on to or in some companies and they've changed the context of it. The context is also
very well. Maybe I'll go away.
Just do it. Don't change anything as a result. That it just becomes just keep doing it. Well, I also found the operation plan there's no taking time out.
What you said.
Rather than discuss what you must think that if you're doing something, no, there was something was really changed. It was more, progress action kind of thing. And not challenging each other or challenging opinions or ideas. Yeah, so no wonder people not improve. The development was just stuck.
Not absolutely.
Yeah. And that's exactly what was happening. Almost save the day. Ray.
It was basically boundary setting. Well, I mean deadline. So it seems to me we made sort of Western approach. Immediately plan on doing a check out. Really good question. Do all activities running up to it. When it goes right, it might be you've got to size the board. Oh, right, okay. Many companies have
Sorry folks, I'm going to have to stop you now. At least everybody was talking, so I hope you had some discussion. Before we carry on, is there, I don't want questions as I said, but is there any observation or comment anybody would like to share? Feels that others would like to hear, would like to share? If there's anything you'd like to say? Yeah?
I think that, you only have to have one idea to spark off the discussion, and then by working all together, how many ideas and thoughts came out.
Yeah, that's great, yeah, good. Anything else, anyone? Yeah?
Well, I'd be interested to hear other people's examples of tools for critical self-reflection.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this, that is a huge, we could have done a whole talk on this, because the reason I started looking at this was when I was writing the module I tutor on now for the Open University, which is on conflict and development, we started saying, we need to, this thing of critical thinking, we're also always telling our students to do this, but we never tell them what we mean by that or how they should do it. So I started researching a bit, okay, what is this thing called critical thinking, and realised it was a really fuzzy concept. It was really not, and there was no, certainly within the open...
Isn't it, really?
Sorry?
It's quite
Yeah, it is quite perverse, yes, it is a fuzzy concept. At least in the sense that there's no particular agreement on what it is and how you should teach it.
So the swines who advocate it don't do it.
Yeah, exactly. Just like the swines who advocate critical reflection don't do it either. So yeah, so there was, and that brought me on then to talk to some, actually was somebody in health and social care who actually do this thing of critical reflection quite a bit, and look at, you know, ways of how you help students to learn how to be critically reflective. And of course, she said the problem with that is, of course, the minute you get people questioning the context and the institution in which they work, it's dangerous because they start challenging the system. So, you know, I found the same thing when I worked with children in primary schools. We were teaching them peace skills, as we call them, but it did involve teaching them questions, asking questions. And of course, they immediately started challenging the whole school system of which they were part. Why is that so unfair? That's so unfair. You know, this was, so, you know, you do have a problem. You start teaching people to be, as I say, critically reflective, especially. Anything else before I move on? As I said, that was I mean, these are to me very high level stuff. There's a lot underneath before you get to that. Partick?
I think we agreed and possibly disagreed more than we admitted.
Yeah. Okay.
So the agreeing was easy.
Yeah, the agreeing's always, yeah. But yeah, no, there'll be, once you start going under the surface a bit, you'll always find there's differences. But I mean, I didn't want to go into, there's a whole lot of what I say, building blocks to me before you get to these skills, like self-awareness, where you are in terms of learner development, how you see knowledge, all these kind of things come into before you get, these are kind of higher level. I don't like calling them skills, I like to call them capacities, because I don't think they're skills as such. But yeah, but that's a talk for another time. Right. Oh, I've done that, right, okay. So I want to say a little bit about diagramming now, and then I'm going to give you another little session to talk about this. So again, I'm going to throw some ideas at you, and you can decide what you think about them. I mean, this has come out of my own experience of doing diagramming, also working with students and other people, you know, other people who are learning about systems thinking. And it started fascinating, is there something about diagramming that's quite useful? And one of the things I came to the conclusion that when you have a particular approach, whether it be doing a rich picture, a causal loop, VSM, whatever, they tend to have certain conventions around them. And if you've ever done any work with students, they'll always skip the conventions, say, oh, spray diagram's fine, just like this. I said, no, you're getting marked on this, you're getting assessed on this, you've got to follow the conventions of doing the diagram. So, you know, you've got to have the arrows going a certain way, whatever. But actually I realised doing that forces you to think differently sometimes. Not always, sometimes. So in other words, that was one of the, and I said this is just a little hypothesis I have no proof at all at the moment other than just through some observations and practice that it is the case. But the other thing, I said the process is not just having to follow the conventions, but because you're continually having to ask yourself, why did I draw that line from that to that? You're constantly questioning yourself why you do things in a particular way. Unless you're one of these people who just slaps up a diagram and says that's fine, that'll do, which some do, but you know, if you're trying to do it well. And I'll give you a few examples. These are, I don't know how well they're coming out there, can you see those? These are rich pictures that students drew, and when I was writing this module, I slipped in some systems thinking stuff, you know, had to kind of put it in somewhere there. But one of the things I managed to get in was getting students to do some rich pictures. They do a simulation, a mediation simulation of the peace walls in Northern Ireland. So one part of the process is they're each asked to draw a rich picture of the situation and then share it with others in their group and talk about it. And to me, I mean, these were to me really powerful kind of images of students who knew nothing about this situation or what they read, what they researched. And then they came up with a depiction which they then used to talk to other students about why have you drawn the picture that way, what do you see in the situation, because ultimately they had to come to a shared perspective. They worked in teams, so they had to agree on a perspective. So that was one example, and I was quite interested in the observations because I asked them about their process of doing those pictures and what they got out of it. And you know, again, they were really going into a lot of depth on why they had, you know, why they'd drawn the picture and what the process did for them. And this was something I was doing myself. I'm a bit of a bird person and I watch birds, and I'm very interested at the moment in the peregrine falcon story. Any bird watchers here? Any bird fan? No? The peregrine falcons nesting in... sorry?
Big fan of peregrine.
Yeah, okay, right, yeah. Well, you know, then they started moving into towns and cities and nesting in high buildings. Because they almost became extinct in the 60s and 70s because of pesticides and everything, persecution. But what interested me about that is these various wildlife trusts, and they're protected species, so there has to be all sorts of regulations for working with them. But various wildlife trusts started putting up nesting platforms for them, and then would start putting these webcams on so people, and live streaming them so people could watch. And what I was fascinated was the reactions of people that were, and you realise now they're only looking at the nest, they can see nothing else of what is going on for this bird and what they're doing. So they've got a very narrow view of what's happening with this bird. The emotional attachment they get to these birds is amazing, and if anything goes wrong, it's incredible. But I was trying to, and